welcome back to the vlog. I hope you've had a really wonderful week. I am back this week with probably my most requested vlog ever, by far. And today I'm going to be doing a little sew along of the Tilly and the Buttons Joni dress. I've made 5 of these so far and really love them, really love the shape and the style. And I know quite a lot of you have asked me to do this sew along so that you can get a better idea of how I do the neck binding and the twist, because I've changed just a couple of things in the instructions just because I find that it works better for me. So before we start sewing, I would absolutely love it if you could subscribe to the channel. You just need to hit the button somewhere down there and subscribe, and then you can join in, leave a comment, get involved, and then you will obviously be able to see the weekly videos as well. So I'll start by showing you the Joni dress that I am wearing. This is from our Flora and Fauna viscose jersey, and if you have been following for a while you'll have seen the whole dress before. It's just got a very simple A-line skirt on it, but this twist is the really popular part of the pattern, and it's the bit that I know I struggled with when I made my first version. And I actually bought my first version in so you can see what I mean. This is the twist, and it's fine, it looks absolutely lovely on, but I do have to position it to hide this slightly untidy neckline. And this was definitely user error. I didn't really understand the instructions quite as well as I probably should have done. So when I wear it, I just make sure that that is tucked in. But with this one and subsequent ones, I have made a few, trying not to flash you, changes that just make it, for me, sit a little bit neater and have a little bit of a neater finish. So I thought what I would do is, I've been wanting to sew another one up for ages. I am sewing it in our gorgeous Cobra Corsage viscose jersey, because you guys know how much I love this fabric. I thought I need a third, maybe fourth outfit in this print, although albeit a different base cloth, and I'm going to sew it along so that you guys can see. So I'm going to start by showing you the front bodice piece. So this is the front bodice piece all cut out. The only alteration I make to this pattern is to add an inch of length onto the bodice. That's just because I'm quite full busted and I find that the more empire line style that it has isn't very flattering for me. So I do add on an extra inch on the pattern just around here and here. The only other difference is that when I've cut this out, all I do is I make a notch at the centre of the bottom and a notch at the centre of the top, and those are the only things that I do to the bodice. I don't create the extra fold at the top here because I find that that leaves more of a gap when you've got your twist. So bodice cut out, notches cut out, and then what you need to do is you need to flip this bottom part of the right hand side over the top. So I'm going to show you. So whilst keeping this side flat, I'm going to take the bottom of the right hand side of the bodice and I'm going to turn it like this, so that the top, now you can see that's our shoulder seam, is at the bottom, and then I'm going to carry on turning it till it goes back at the top, and I'll lay that out flat. So you can see now you've got this twist in the middle and it's raised the shape of the bodice in the centre there slightly. Don't worry about this twist for now, because obviously you can see the wrong side of the fabric and it looks quite messy, but we're going to fix all of that. So the first thing that I do now is I pin this centre front seam. So what you will do is fold your pieces right sides together. So you've now got your left and right side of your bodice touching. You can see we've got this twist in the middle, and then down here, this is the bottom part of the centre front seam underneath the twist. So I've just flipped this round so that the twist is on the left hand side, just because I find it easier to pin from this angle. So I'm going to pin the bottom part of the bodices together at that centre front join, and then I'm going to put another pin down here. And as I get closer to this twist, I'm going to keep pulling it out the way, just gently, but just so that I can get this centre front seam closed. And there we go. So as you can see, pinned that in there, and if I flipped that open from the right side, you could see that's just going to join our centre front bodice. So I've just flipped that over so you can see the side that I'll be sewing. I start at the bottom of the bodice and sew down to where the twist is, and I do find that you are left with a little gap, which again you can see sometimes on the front of the bodice. So what I do is I sew down the line of straight stitching until I get towards the twist, and then I try and get as close to that as I can, and I'm going to stitch it and show you what I mean. So I'm using my sewing machine to construct the front twist and the neckline on the bodice. Normally I use my overlocker for everything, but I have found with this pattern that using the machine will give me a little bit more control. I have done a previous vlog with some tips on sewing jersey, which I will link up here if you would like to have a watch, but needless to say, I am using a stretch needle and I'm also using a walking foot on the machine, just because I find that gives you a little better finish when sewing with jersey, and I talk about that in the vlog that I mentioned. So I'm just going to stitch down that centre front seam, and I'm going to use the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance until I get close to the top. So I've sewn the first part of the centre front seam at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, as you can see, and I've been pulling my pins out as I go. However, as I get closer to this twist, I'm keeping it tucked out of the way with my left hand, and I'm just keeping the raw edges of the centre front seam together with my right hand, and I'm going to stay on my 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. And then as I get closer, I'm going to narrow my seam allowance so that I come out as close to the twist as I can. This is the only time that using the walking foot makes it slightly trickier, because you do obviously have this toe of the walking foot which can get in the way. So I just try and move it round as closely as I can. So now go up that way. So hopefully you can see I've sewn down the centre seam of the bodice, and then I've come in at a curve so that I can get as close to that twist as possible, and then that just leaves a very small hole. You need some form of hole because the twist has to be there, but you could even, if you weren't using a walking foot, I could probably get a little bit closer to that. And what I'll now do is just finish this seam on the overlocker. I'm going to trim the loose thread, and we now have our centre front seam, which is stitched down with the curve at the top there, and then I've just overlocked that edge. And then when you open it up, this centre part of the bodice is stitched together nicely. You can see that that twist is starting to come in on itself more now. But again, still don't worry about the fact that you can see some of the fabric from the wrong side. So that's the first part of the bodice construction done. What we now need to do is put our back bodice right sides together and join it at the shoulder seams. So I'm putting my back bodice on the top, and I'm just going to pin. You can and probably should secure your shoulder seam, or stabilise your shoulder seams with some ribbon or some clear elastic to stop them stretching out over time. But I have to admit that I haven't done it for this example, and I actually haven't done it for the example I'm wearing either, and this fabric seems to hold its shape really well. So I've just pinned those two top shoulder seams right sides together, the front and back bodice, and I'm just going to overlock those straight away because I don't need any fiddly bits on the machine. So I'm just trimming my thread ends, and now, as you can see, the back bodice is joined at the shoulder seams to the front bodice, and if I flip it round and get rid of the loose tails, you can see the front bodice shape with the twist in the middle and our centre front seam. Now what we need to do is put our neck binding on. So you need to find your neck binding piece. I need to find my neck binding piece. So this is your neck binding piece. It's just a long, narrow rectangle. I am going to press it lengthways, wrong sides together, and pressing it will just help when you're trying to sew it. So once you've pressed it, your neckband, or your neck binding, sorry, will stay relatively flat. Hopefully, if your fabric is nice and well behaved, like this one is. I can't remember if the pattern piece has a notch at the centre of the neck binding because I haven't marked the notches off. But if it does or it doesn't, make sure you fold your neck binding in half and just make a really small notch in the centre so that you know where the centre of your neck binding is. And the same for your back bodice piece. Just fold your shoulder seams together if there isn't already a notch on there, so that you can find the centre and just snip a really small notch into there. And that just is going to help us evenly distribute the neck binding. You will notice that I am saying, or trying to remember to say, neck binding instead of neckband. So it's very similar, but this band is actually going to be turned underneath once we've stitched it on and top stitched down. So it's actually binding the neck rather than having a neckband that's on show. I think the first time I made this dress, I wasn't 100% certain what I was doing. I thought I was attaching a neckband, so I was trying to approach it in a slightly different way, but it is a neck binding, so it's going to flip under and you won't see it. So the way I start is with one end of my neck binding, and I'm going to hold my bodice up and I'm going to search along the front of the bodice on one side, just for where we made that centre notch on the front we just made on the back, but the notch from when we first started, which as you I'm going to hold it up so that it makes it easier for you to see where I mean. As you work your way around this neck front, you will find, and you might have to push this twist over out the way slightly. So I'm going to start on the right hand side of the bodice as you're looking at it, which will then be the left hand side when you're wearing it. And I'm going to take the binding, and as you can see it's folded in half, and I'm going to find that centre notch, and I'm going to line up the raw edge with that centre notch, and I'm going to pop a pin in it to keep it in place. Next, I'm going to move this binding round the back and find the centre notch that we put in the back bodice. So say, I'm really sorry guys, I can't remember which notches are already on the pattern, but if you have a centre back notch, that's what you're looking for. If not, we've added one in anyway. And I'm going to attach that there so that I know that it's distributed equally from the front to the back. And then I'm going to follow it round all the way down to the other side of the front bodice. And this time you're going to have to move your twist over and pull that centre notch through, and be careful because your pin is still there. So if you pull it through very gently, you should find the other edge. There we go. So I'm going to attach that with another pin. There we go. And our original pin is still in there, it's just tucked in a little bit, so I'm just going to squidge that knot to the centre. Right, so now we've pinned it at the centre front on that side, we pinned it at the centre back, and then we've come back round and pinned it at the centre front on the other side, both either side of the notch on the centre front bodice. What we're now going to do is put some more pins all the way around so that we're holding it in place. We know that it's stretched equally because we marked our centre back, so you just need to put an equal amount of stretch all the way around. So some people prefer pinning with their work on the table. I actually find I've got more control if I do it whilst I'm sat down. I've got this in front of me. So all I'm doing is just distributing the stretch of the neck binding around that raw edge of the bodice neckline and popping a few pins in. Don't want to use loads of pins because otherwise you have to keep stopping and taking them out, and that can make it difficult to keep your stitching straight, but you want to use enough so that you know it's going to be held in place. So I think I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on that side, and then the centre seam. I'm going to show you this once I've pinned it as well, so don't worry if you can't see exactly what I'm doing. When you come to pinning around the other side and you get closer to the twist, you may find that you just gently have to move that twist over out of the way. Right, last pin, so I'll show you what this looks like before we sew it. So this is our bodice centre front, this is the twist, and then the neckband is pinned all the way around with the raw edges matching up to the raw edges of the bodice. We've spread that stretch evenly around, and now I'm going to start sewing from here all the way around and back to that centre notch. What's really important to avoid a loose, untidy edge is to make sure that this raw edge of your neckband stays flush with your centre front notch. So there's the edge of my centre front notch, and there you go, there's the edge of my centre front notch, and as I stitch it I'm going to make sure that that neckband stays exactly flush with that. I'm going to start there and then I'm going to sew all the way around, and then when I get to this side I'm going to make sure that again it's flush with the other side of the centre front notch, and I'll show you as I go. So I'm starting at the centre notch, and then I'm going to stretch and stitch, and I'm using a 1 centimetre seam allowance for this. Each time I get to a pin, I'm going to take the pins out and keep stretching it nice and taut. This is why I use a sewing machine for this bit, because it is quite fiddly and it's much better to get it right and then be able to finish it off on the overlocker than get it wrong and have to unpick and recut a neckband. So now we're coming back round to the centre on the other side where the twist is, and I'm just going to gently move the twist out of the way so that I've got some more space to work, and I'm just going to keep this end of my binding lined up with the edge of that little notch. And you can see it does want to stretch out a little bit because the weight of the twist and our little notch, and because this is lighter fabric, it is pulling ever so slightly, so try not to let it stretch out too much. And just stitch gently all the way to the end. There we go. So I'll take that out and then I'll show you. So the neck binding has been attached all the way round. It's stretched nice and evenly, and then if we look at the centre, you have to pull this through a little bit, but our neck binding meets on one side of the centre notch and on the other side of the centre notch. So now all we're going to do is turn this binding underneath like that, so to the wrong side of the bodice, and we're going to zigzag stitch, or if you prefer you can use a twin needle, but I find a zigzag stitch nice and easy all the way round. You can pin this in place before you do it as well, so I'm going to stitch that and then I'll show you, because that will be the finished neck binding. So I like to use a really narrow zigzag stitch like I've got in here, just so that it keeps it in place. It's got a little bit of stretch, but not very much, so that it's not going to stretch out of place. So I'm going to sew that round now. Just like when you're putting the binding on the first time, when you're top stitching it down, it's really important just to keep everything nice and taut and stretched out, so that your bodice layer and your neckband don't pucker up. So there we have our finished neck binding. The binding has been stitched on and stitched underneath, so that stays in place all the way round, and you'll find that the twist brings itself around once you've stitched everything in place, but you can just push it back to the centre so that you get that nice neat finish, and if you've missed any threads then obviously trim those off. So there you go, nice and neat. So that gives you a better idea of how it's going to look when it's on, and this neck binding is all tucked underneath, and the little tiny hole there is very small, and because we've only got a little centre notch, everything is tucked in behind that twist. So I'm now going to carry on, follow the instructions to set in the sleeves and sew up the side seams of the bodice, and then attach the skirt, and I will come back to you in a different location, because I'm going to have to go home now because there's a class about to start, and show you the finished dress. So here's the finished dress. I hope you like it. I love it. I've wanted to obviously make one from this fabric for ages, and I'm really happy with how neat the front looks and the neck binding. My 3 things to remember would be to just notch at the top and the bottom. When you're sewing the centre front seam, get as close to the twist as you can so there isn't an obvious hole. And when you are stitching the neck binding on, remember that you want it to meet at the centre notch so that you don't get a gap in the top of your twist. And obviously it's a binding, so you're flipping it under and top stitching it. I hope that was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. I love the pattern, and as I say, I think this is my 6th one, so I just wanted to share those tips, and hopefully they'll help some of you. If you have enjoyed it, then please do subscribe to the channel, hit the button down below, and give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment. I'll try and answer questions, and I hope you all have a really, really wonderful week. I will be back really soon. Bye!